Imagine getting a knock on your door, two guys in cheap uniforms, flashing fake badges, claiming to be HOA police. They demand you step outside, saying you're under arrest. But there's just one problem. I know the law better than they do, because I'm a U.S. Marshal. And the moment I called their bluff, Karen's little scheme fell apart in the most satisfying way possible. It all started with a sign. A simple, metal "No Trespassing" sign I bolted onto the fence post at the edge of my yard. I didn't think much of it, just part of settling into my new home. A quiet, one-acre property tucked just outside of town. I'd picked it on purpose. No HOA, no nosey neighbors, no nonsense, or so I thought. 2 days later, I found a note taped to the sign. Not in an envelope, not in a mailbox, just taped there with bright red letters. This sign violates Oak Creek community guidelines. Remove it immediately. It wasn't signed. Just Oak Creek HOA Compliance Board. Funny thing is, Oak Creek didn't even have jurisdiction over my land. That's why I bought it. The property was outside the HOA boundary. I checked that before signing, twice. My land wasn't under their thumb, but someone didn't like that. I took the note, crumpled it up, tossed it in the trash, and went about my day. Then the letters started. First, it was a courtesy notice, then a first violation warning, then a second notice with a bolded line at the bottom. Failure to respond will result in legal action. The violations were ridiculous. Unauthorized signage, non-compliant fencing, failure to register property improvements. I didn't even have improvements, just a lawn, a small shed, and the same truck I'd been driving for 10 years. The kicker, each violation came with a fine. $75 here, $125 there. I wasn't even part of their community, and they were sending me bills like I owed them rent. At first I ignored them, but they didn't stop. Every few days, more envelopes, all the same gold and blue letterhead, all threatening, all fake. And then I met her, Karen. It was a Tuesday morning. I'd just gotten back from a night shift, parked my truck still in uniform, badge tucked under my jacket. I walked up the path to grab my mail, and there she was, standing at the edge of my property like she owned the whole block. Blonde bob, clipboard, overly stiff posture. You know the type. "You must be Mr. Reeves," she said, fake smiling like she was trying to sell me something I didn't want. "I'm Karen Whitfield. I'm the acting president of the Oak Creek HOA. I nodded once, not saying a word. "I wanted to speak with you in person," she went on, flipping through papers, "about your outstanding violations. We've mailed several notices, but it appears you failed to respond appropriately." I looked down at her paperwork, typed up nonsense and a stack of printed fines. "I'm not part of your HOA," I said plainly. "This property isn't under Oak Creek." She blinked, then her smile tightened. "Well," she said, "there's a gray area. Your property may not be officially listed within the HOA boundary, but it's within our community influence zone." "That means," I cut her off. "No, it doesn't. I bought this place because it wasn't in the HOA. I checked the deeds. Your influence doesn't mean anything to me." She paused for a beat like she wasn't used to being challenged. Then she slid a paper toward me. "Regardless, these fines are now past due. If you don't comply, we'll be forced to escalate the matter to our legal team." I gave a short laugh. "Legal team? For what? Posting a no trespassing sign on my property. It's about maintaining community standards," she snapped. "No," I said, stepping forward just enough to remind her she was on my land. "It's about control, and I'm not playing your game. You or your HOA come near my mailbox again, and I'll file for harassment." She stiffened but didn't back down. "You'll regret being difficult," she said, tone shifting. I shrugged. "Try me." She turned and walked off, clipboard in one hand, ego in the other. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The next week, I found tire tracks through my lawn. Then someone dumped leaves and brush into my yard like they were trying to make it look messy. Later that week, my mailbox was ripped clean off its post. It was petty stuff, childish, but I knew exactly who was behind it. Still, I didn't bite. I waited. I documented everything. I installed cameras, and I stayed calm, because I've dealt with worse than Karen before. I didn't just work in law enforcement. I was a U.S. Marshal. But Karen didn't know that, not yet, and she wasn't done. One morning, I got a knock on the door. I opened it and found a man in a gray polo shirt, holding a clipboard and wearing a cheap-looking badge that said HOA Compliance Enforcement. Behind him, another guy stood by an SUV with magnetic signs that read Oak Creek Enforcement Unit. "You're Mr. Reeves?" the first guy asked. "Who's asking?" I replied. "Sir, we're here on behalf of the Oak Creek HOA. You've been served multiple violation notices. We're here to enforce compliance." I raised an eyebrow. "You're here to do what? Your fines have exceeded the limit for voluntary resolution. We're authorized to detain you pending a community hearing." He actually said that. I blinked once slowly. "Detain me? You two think you have the authority to detain someone over fake HOA fines?" He cleared his throat. "Sir, refusal to cooperate could lead to escalation." I didn't let him finish. I stepped aside, reached into the drawer near the door and pulled out my badge, a real one. I held it up so they could see it plain as day. "I'm a U.S. Marshal," I said evenly. "And you two just threatened to detain a federal officer over fake HOA violations." Their faces changed instantly. The guy with the clipboard froze. The one by the SUV went pale and lowered his eyes. "You want to tell me your names?" I asked. "Or should we just go straight to impersonating law enforcement?" Neither of them spoke. I took a step out onto the porch. "Here's what's going to happen," I said. "You're going to get off my property. You're going to tell Karen she's just messed with the wrong guy. And if either of you come back here again, you'll be leaving in cuffs." That was all it took. They left, fast, didn't say a word, drove off like their seats were on fire. But the story didn't end there, because I just confirmed something I suspected all along. Karen wasn't bluffing. She was actually trying to stage an arrest. And now I knew she was dangerous. Not just annoying, not just power-hungry, dangerous. And she had no idea the storm she just woke up. After those two clowns left my property, I stood there on the porch for a solid minute, just staring at the dust trail they kicked up speeding off. It would have been funny if it wasn't so serious. Karen wasn't playing games anymore. She had just sent two fake cops to my door. Uniforms, badges, the whole act. That wasn't some prank or HOA drama. That was a felony, and she didn't even flinch. I could have shut it down right then. Called local law enforcement, sent a report, raised hell. But I didn't. Why? Because people like Karen don't just stop when you call them out. You have to expose them in the open with the whole neighborhood watching. You have to let them bury themselves so deep they can't crawl out. So I went back inside and started planning. First, I ran the plates on that enforcement unit SUV, registered to a Shell LLC, no insurance, no business license, no private security credentials, just a front, probably something Karen whipped up with one of her HOA board buddies. Then I pulled surveillance footage from my cameras, every angle, every word those two jokers said. Their faces, their vehicle, the moment I flashed my real badge, all of it on record. Then I sat back and waited. I knew Karen wouldn't stop with that stunt. People like her never back down after they've been challenged. They escalate. They double down. And 3 days later, I got proof. A large manila envelope showed up on my doorstep. No postage, no return address, just tucked behind the welcome mat like someone was trying to be sneaky. Inside was a stack of documents, fake legal citations, a phony notice of arrest authorization, and a printout with a laughable seal stamped in the corner. Oak Creek Special Enforcement Division. They actually made a logo. The letter read like it was written by someone who Googled how to write a warrant and gave up halfway through. It accused me of ongoing community violations, threats against enforcement agents, and refusal to adhere to mandatory HOA policies. It ended with a deadline. Failure to comply within 72 hours will result in forced detainment and legal seizure of property. I nearly choked on my coffee. She was out of her mind. But that was what I needed. That letter crossed a serious legal line. You can't just slap fake charges on someone and threaten to seize their property. Not unless you want to end up behind bars yourself. So I made my move. First, I reached out to a buddy of mine at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Sent him everything, the letters, the footage, the vehicle info, even the fake documents from the envelope. He didn't laugh, not even once. "This is serious," he said. "You're dealing with someone running a full-blown extortion scheme. If she's done this to you, odds are she's done it to others." That's when I realized it wasn't just about me. Karen was probably targeting anyone who didn't play by her rules. Elderly homeowners, new families, people too scared or confused to fight back. And if she thought they were weak, she'd pounce. I couldn't let that go. So I started digging into the HOA. I pulled public records, community filings, anything I could find with Oak Creek's name on it. The board was a joke. Half the members were Karen's personal friends. The other half had quit over the years, citing internal conflict. No surprise there. But the real jackpot came when I found complaints, online forums, review boards, even a Facebook group. People were talking, and not in a good way. One woman wrote about getting a $500 fine for unauthorized holiday decor after putting up Christmas lights in November. Another man said he got a lien threat because his mailbox wasn't HOA approved, despite living outside the HOA boundary. Sound familiar? Dozens of homeowners, all telling similar stories. Harassment, fake fees, bogus legal notices, and when they complained, they got ignored or worse. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was running a racket, and nobody had stopped her. Because most people don't know the law. They see a letter with fancy letterhead and they panic. They pay, they comply, they try to keep the peace. But I wasn't most people. I wasn't going to panic. I was going to finish what she started, so I crafted a plan. Step 1. Play dumb. I wrote a letter pretending to be nervous. I said I didn't understand the violations. I asked for clarification on the enforcement procedure. I even asked if there was a way to settle the matter without it going further. I signed it with my full name and dropped it off at the Oak Creek HOA Dropbox. I knew Karen would read it herself. That's how she worked. She had to be in control. Step 2. Set the trap. I contacted the local police chief, gave him the full rundown. He wasn't surprised. We've had whispers about that HOA for a while, he said, but nobody ever brought us evidence this solid. I gave him the letter, the video, the vehicle info, everything. Then I called my contact at the DA's office, told him it was go time. Step 3, wait for Karen to take the bait, and she did. Big time. The next day I got an email with the subject line, mandatory arbitration meeting scheduled, final notice. No courthouse, no official office. Just an address and a time. Some random room at the Oak Creek Community Recreation Center. That's when I knew she was about to hang herself. The room was rented under the HOA's name. Karen set it up to look like an official hearing. Probably planned to show up with her fake badges, phony paperwork, and compliance board members wearing clip-on ties and smug expressions. But she had no idea that 3 real law enforcement agencies had been briefed, prepped, and ready. She still thought I was just another homeowner she could scare into submission. She thought wrong. The morning of the meeting, I dressed like any regular guy. Plain clothes, no badge. Just a folder in my hand and a calm look on my face. I walked into the room 5 minutes early. Karen was already there, sitting at the head of the table like she was Judge Judy. 2 fake board members sat beside her, each with a binder in front of them like props. They didn't even make eye contact. I sat down across from her, didn't say a word. She smiled like she'd already won. Mr. Reeves, she began, flipping through papers. We're here today to finalize resolution procedures for your ongoing violations. As you failed to comply, I cut her off. Just curious, I said. You usually stage these fake hearings in public buildings, or is this a special occasion? Her eyes narrowed. I'm sorry, I mean, this isn't a courthouse. You're not a judge, and this isn't legal. The 2 board members glanced at each other. Karen looked annoyed. This is a recognized HOA arbitration forum, she snapped. Per the Oak Creek Charter. There is no charter, I said, louder this time. Your board doesn't have jurisdiction. You're threatening homeowners with fake legal action. You sent fake officers to my house. Karen's voice dropped into a hiss. You're out of line. No, I said, rising to my feet. You are. And right on cue, the back doors opened. 3 officers walked in, 1 from the sheriff's office, 1 from the state licensing board, and 1 in a suit, the DA's investigator. Karen froze. The board members turned white. The lead officer stepped forward and pulled a stack of documents from his folder. He looked Karen square in the eyes. Karen Whitfield, you are under investigation for impersonating law enforcement, attempted extortion, and conspiracy to defraud multiple homeowners under false HOA authority. And just like that, Karen's entire world started crumbling. But trust me, we weren't even close to finished. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more wild, real-life HOA drama, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Every new subscriber keeps me motivated to dig deeper, write more, and bring you even crazier stories. Your support means the world. It's what keeps this channel going strong. So stick around because we've got way more chaos coming your way. Karen sat frozen, mouth half open, eyes bouncing between the three officers now standing in front of her. It was like reality finally caught up and slapped her across the face. She blinked fast, like maybe if she didn't say anything, she could rewind the clock. Pretend this wasn't happening. But it was happening, and I was just getting started. "Karen Whitfield," the sheriff's deputy repeated, louder this time. "You're being investigated for multiple charges tied to impersonating law enforcement, filing fraudulent claims, and issuing illegal fines to homeowners outside HOA jurisdiction." Karen finally spoke, but it wasn't smart. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, slapping the table with her palm. "This is my meeting. This man," she jabbed a finger at me, "has been threatening the HOA. He refused to follow protocol. He's dangerous." I raised an eyebrow but didn't even bother replying. Her desperation was doing all the work. The DA investigator calmly pulled out a folder and dropped it on the table in front of her. It popped open, spilling out copies of her fake notices, photos of the fake badges, even screenshots of the so-called arrest warrant she taped to my door. Karen's face turned ghost white. One of the board members tried to slide his chair back, real slow. Another pulled out his phone and started typing frantically, probably texting a lawyer or praying for an exit. "None of this is legal," the investigator said. "You've fabricated enforcement notices, staged fake court hearings, and hired unlicensed individuals to pose as HOA compliance officers. That's impersonation of law enforcement, wire fraud, and harassment." "I was just trying to keep the neighborhood in order," Karen shouted, voice shrill. "This community was falling apart," the sheriff stepped closer. "You don't get to make up the law just because you don't like how people run their homes. You've crossed way beyond HOA enforcement. You've created an extortion ring." Karen started shaking her head, backing up from the table. "This is a mistake. You don't know the full story." "I know enough," I finally said, stepping forward. "And I'm not just a homeowner. I'm a U.S. Marshal. You sent 2 fake cops to detain a federal officer. You threatened me with phony arrests and tried to steal private property." Now, everyone in the room knew. The 2 board members looked like they were about to puke. Karen's knees buckled. She grabbed the back of her chair for balance. The sheriff nodded at the investigator, then turned to me. "We're not making an arrest today, not yet. But now that we have her entire operation laid out, it's only a matter of time." Karen practically lunged across the table. "You can't do this. This isn't fair. He's lying. He forged those documents. He's targeting me." But it didn't matter what she said. Her meltdown only helped us more. And as the officers gathered their materials and left, I stood by the door. "You should have walked away when I told you to, Karen," I said quietly. "But you kept pushing, and now you're going to lose everything." She didn't answer. She just stared at me like I'd taken something from her. But the truth was, she took it from herself. By the end of that week, everything started unraveling. It was like pulling one loose thread on a sweater, except the whole damn thing came apart. A notice went out from the sheriff's office to every homeowner in the Oak Creek neighborhood. "If you've received notices, fines, or threats from the HOA outside legal guidelines, please come forward." And people did, dozens of them. Emails, calls, personal visits to the local station. Homeowners who'd been bullied threatened, fined for everything from trash cans being visible to unauthorized porch chairs. One elderly couple came forward with proof Karen had filed a lien against their home on Christmas Eve, claiming unpaid HOA dues. They weren't even in Oak Creek. Another guy, a veteran, showed receipts for over $1,300 in payments to avoid threats of foreclosure. Turned out the entire thing was fake. He was never even officially part of the association. Karen's scam had gone further than anyone realized, but she didn't work alone. That became obvious fast. A paper trail exposed 3 of her board members, signing off on enforcement letters, approving arrest warnings, even routing payments through a second bank account tied to a dummy corporation. They were in on it from the start. The whole thing was a racket. They called it compliance enforcement. What it really was, organized fraud, and Karen was the ringleader. But the fallout didn't stop at fraud. One of the men she sent to my house, the fake cop with the badge and clipboard, he got picked up by police 2 towns over. Turns out he had a rap sheet, petty theft, impersonation, even an outstanding warrant. So not only was Karen paying unlicensed security, she was hiring actual criminals. That's when federal charges started building. The U.S. Attorney's office launched a full investigation, and I was called in to help provide evidence, video, documents, timelines. They weren't just going after Karen anymore. They were targeting the entire Oak Creek HOA. Meanwhile, Karen tried to play the victim. She held an emergency meeting with the board, what was left of it, and posted a letter online accusing me of abusing power, colluding with law enforcement to dismantle the HOA, and staging a conspiracy. The comments section lit her up in minutes. Karen, you sent fake cops. Pretty rich coming from someone running a scam. You threatened a federal officer and now you're crying foul. She had no support left. None. The board disbanded 2 days later. Oak Creek HOA was officially suspended by the county until further notice, which meant no more fines, no more threats, no more Karen at your door with a clipboard. The entire neighborhood breathed a sigh of relief. But that wasn't enough. I wasn't just going to let Karen fade away and play innocent. I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice. She hadn't just crossed a line. She'd sprinted over it carrying a flag with her name on it. Between the impersonation, the false documents, the fake enforcement threats, and the extortion attempts, she was looking at a long list of charges. But Karen, she still wasn't done digging. She tried to file a restraining order against me, claimed I was harassing her, said I was sabotaging her work, that I was dangerous and unstable. She filed the paperwork herself without a lawyer. Didn't even get the legal terms right. The judge tossed it in under 5 minutes. Then he referred her case straight to the state attorney for review. Karen showed up to the hearing all dressed up like a professional, folder in hand, smug smile, pretending like this was some kind of misunderstanding. I showed up with a box of evidence. When I placed that box on the table and the prosecutor opened it, copy after copy of fake letters, violation slips, footage of the fake enforcers, Karen's face fell like a broken curtain rod. And I knew in that moment she wasn't going to wiggle out of this one, because the next part was going to be public and permanent. By the time the hearing ended, the courthouse hallway was packed. Reporters, curious neighbors, a couple people from Oak Creek who'd gotten hit with fake fines and were eager to see Karen crash and burn. And oh, she did. The judge issued an immediate injunction. Karen was barred from all HOA activity, from contacting any homeowners, and most importantly, from setting foot on any property not legally her own. That included the HOA office. She didn't take it well. As she left the courtroom, she tried to spin it. Told a few cameras she was being persecuted by federal power, that it was a government overreach, said the community needed structure, and she was just providing leadership. But people weren't buying it, not after seeing the photos of fake arrest warrants plastered on someone's front door. Not after hearing she sent men impersonating law enforcement to intimidate residents. Not after the court confirmed that she'd been stealing thousands from people under the table. The public opinion flipped hard. Karen, once the loudest voice in the neighborhood, suddenly couldn't show her face at the grocery store without getting stared down. But the real reckoning hadn't hit her yet, because just 1 week after the injunction, the federal case was finalized. A full investigation team had compiled everything: emails, forged documents, video footage, fake contracts, audio recordings, even the HOA's so-called enforcement guidelines, which were literally pulled from a Word doc with no legal basis, and the final charges: wire fraud, impersonation of law enforcement, conspiracy to commit extortion, obstruction, mail fraud. She was facing real time. The feds called me personally to let me know the date they were going to pick her up. They didn't need me there, but I wanted to see it, so I showed up. Karen lived in one of the biggest houses in the neighborhood, paid for by HOA administrative fees and compliance penalties. She loved to flaunt her power. Big lawn, multiple security cameras, luxury SUV in the driveway like she was somebody important. But that morning, she answered the door in a bathrobe, no makeup, and the look of someone who hadn't slept in days. The 2 federal agents stood calm and direct. "Karen Whitfield," one said, "you're under arrest for multiple federal offenses tied to a fraudulent HOA enforcement operation." Her mouth opened like she was about to launch into another rant. But this time, there was no one to impress, no fake badge, no clipboard, no board members to back her up, just cold metal cuffs and a list of charges longer than her driveway. She tried one last move. "I didn't do anything wrong. I was just enforcing community rules." One of the agents cut her off. You impersonated federal authority, collected money through false threats, and sent criminals door to door under the guise of enforcement. That's not enforcing rules. That's running a con. They walked her out, hands behind her back, while I stood across the street. She saw me, and for the first time, she didn't say a word. You'd think that'd be the end. But no, Karen's mess went deeper than anyone guessed, because the minute the arrest went public, more victims came forward. Turns out she'd been running side schemes for years, pressuring homeowners to voluntarily donate to community upgrades that never happened, special landscaping assessments, security enhancements, gate improvements, all of it fake, all of it just another way to pad her own pockets. And those board members who signed off on it, they started flipping fast once the indictments came down. One guy, Dale, claimed he thought it was just a formality, that Karen handled everything, that he never read the documents, just signed what she handed him. Didn't matter. He signed off on fraud. That made him part of it. Another woman on the board confessed she'd been getting a monthly bonus in cash, envelopes delivered to her mailbox by Karen herself. But here's the part that really ticked me off. They weren't just scamming homeowners. They were targeting specific ones, anyone who didn't speak up, older residents, immigrants, single parents, people who were less likely to push back or fight legally. Karen saw those people as easy marks, and now they were finally getting justice. The Oak Creek HOA was officially dissolved within 30 days of Karen's arrest. Every homeowner who'd been fined, harassed, or forced to pay bogus fees was sent letters offering full reimbursement. Some got thousands back. Others filed lawsuits and got settlements on top of that. The whole community flipped. No more HOA police. No more nonsense rules about how tall your grass could be or what kind of curtains were allowed. No more threats. Just people finally free to live in peace. And me, I didn't do this to be the hero. I did it because Karen went after the wrong guy. She thought she was dealing with just another homeowner, someone she could push around, scare into paying up, and silence if they got too loud. But instead, she tried to con a U.S. Marshal, and I wasn't going to just watch it happen. Now, here's the best part. Remember the fake arbitration hearing she tried to hold? The one where she sat at a rented table with a gavel like she was Judge Judy? Yeah, that clip made the news. One of the homeowners she scammed had recorded the whole thing on his phone. That footage got aired on the local station. Then it spread online. Reddit picked it up. Karen runs a fake courtroom became a headline people couldn't ignore. She became a meme. Clips of her yelling about community order and authorized detainment were spliced into videos with clown music. People started calling her the HOA dictator. The neighborhood Facebook page changed its banner to a screenshot of her getting arrested. She went viral for all the wrong reasons. And you know what? She deserved it, for every threat, for every fine, for every homeowner she tried to scare. Karen built a little kingdom out of fear and fake power, and in the end it collapsed under the weight of her own ego. After everything settled, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten. No return address, just a short note, thank you. I didn't think anyone would ever stop her. No name. No signature, just gratitude, and honestly, that meant more than any victory, because Karen didn't just break rules, she broke trust. She abused a position that was supposed to protect the community. And once people realized she wasn't untouchable, everything changed. That's what happens when you stand up to a bully, especially one with a badge made from a printer and an ego big enough to think it made her untouchable. But the law, it doesn't care about clipboards and fake titles. The law shows up, eventually, and in Karen's case, it showed up with real badges, real charges, and a one-way trip to federal court.